That morning, Alistair Finch had fired thousands with a single signature. That afternoon, he was a man in rags on a muddy village road, unable to even remember his name. The man who ruled the world was now in a position to beg for a sip of water, and he was unaware that the hand extending that water belonged to an innocent girl whose life he had ruined. The day had started as they all did for Alistair, with power. He stood in his penthouse office, a sterile cage of glass and steel 80 floors above the city. The skyline, a testament to human ambition, was his personal kingdom. Below, cars moved like silent, metallic blood cells through the city's arteries. He felt nothing for them. They were abstract concepts, parts of a machine he controlled. At exactly 9 a.m., he strode into the boardroom. The air crackled with tension. His board members, all powerful men and women in their own right, sat silently, their eyes fixed on him. They feared him, and he savored that fear. On the polished mahogany table lay a single file. It contained the fate of the Northwood Textile Mill and its 2,000 employees. The numbers on the spreadsheets were cold and clear. The factory was underperforming. It was a relic of a bygone era, a sentimental blot on his otherwise pristine portfolio. "The numbers don't lie," Alistair had said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The factory is a drain on our resources. We are not a charity. We are an engine of profit." One of the older board members, a man named George, cleared his throat. "Alistair, these people, many have worked there for generations. It's the lifeblood of their town. Closing it down will be catastrophic for them." Alistair pierced George with a glacial stare. "Sentiment is a currency we do not trade in, George. Your compassion is noted and dismissed." He uncapped his expensive fountain pen. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the room. With a flourish of his signature, 2,000 lives were irrevocably altered. He closed the file and pushed aside. "Next," he said, already moving on. He didn't spare a single thought for the families he had just condemned to poverty and despair. For him, it was just another Tuesday. By early afternoon, he was in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, gliding through the countryside towards his weekend estate. He was on the phone, verbally eviscerating a competitor who had dared to bid against him on a recent acquisition. "You will learn," he snarled into the phone, "that when you stand against me, you are not fighting a man. You are fighting an avalanche." He hung up, a flicker of cruel satisfaction on his face. It was then that the sky turned a bruised, angry shade of purple. Rain began to lash against the windows, thick and furious. The world outside became a blur of green and gray. His driver, a man he had never bothered to learn the name of, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "The road is very slippery, Mr. Finch. Perhaps we should pull over and wait for the storm to pass." "Don't be a coward," Alistair snapped. "I am not paying you to wait. Drive." The driver, intimidated, pressed on. They rounded a sharp, tree-lined bend. Suddenly, a massive oak tree, weakened by the storm, groaned and began to fall. The driver screamed and swerved violently. The Maybach, a fortress of German engineering, spun out of control on the slick asphalt. There was a deafening screech of metal, the explosive shatter of glass, and then, for Alistair Finch, the world dissolved into an absolute, silent darkness. He woke up to the feeling of cold mud on his cheek. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, dripping from the leaves of the trees above him. He was not in the car. He was in a forest, lying in a ditch. A sharp, throbbing pain radiated from a gash on his temple. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. His $1,000 suit was shredded and caked in mud. He looked at his hands, covered in dirt and scratches. They were unfamiliar. He looked around at the dripping, silent woods. Nothing was familiar. A cold wave of panic, an emotion so alien to him it felt like a physical violation, washed over him. He tried to remember how he got here. He tried to remember where here was. He tried to remember his own name. Nothing. His mind was a perfect, terrifying blank. It was a pristine white room with no doors and no windows. The man who could recall the stock performance of 100 companies over a decade could not recall the face of his own mother. He was nobody. He stumbled through the undergrowth, Driven by a primal instinct for survival, after what felt like an eternity, he emerged onto a narrow, muddy country road. He was shivering, both from the cold and the shock. In the distance, he saw the headlights of an approaching farm truck. Hope surged through him. He stepped onto the road, waving a weak arm. The truck slowed. The driver, a burly farmer, leaned over, took one look at the wild, muddy, blood-caked figure, and his eyes widened in fear. He stomped on the accelerator, spraying Alistair with a plume of muddy water as he sped away. The rejection was a physical blow. He was not a man to be helped. He was a threat to be avoided. Despair, another foreign feeling, settled into his bones. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the soft shoulder of the road, the world spinning around him. He was thirsty, so incredibly thirsty. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the encroaching darkness. This was it. This was how his story, whatever it had been, would end. That was when he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel. He forced his eyes open. A figure was standing over him. It was a young woman, no older than 20. She was dressed in simple, worn clothes, and her face was etched with concern that was so genuine, so pure, that it felt like a mirage. This was Elara. She had been in the nearby woods, gathering medicinal herbs, a skill passed down from her grandmother. She lived with her ailing father in a small cottage just over the hill. Her father, a proud man named Thomas, had been the foreman at the Northwood textile mill until it had been shut down without warning a few weeks ago. The closure had not only taken his job, it had taken his spirit. His health had declined rapidly ever since, a decline fueled by a sense of worthlessness and despair. Elara was now his sole caregiver, her youthful energy consumed by the struggle to make ends meet and care for a man broken by a faceless corporation. When she first saw the body on the side of the road, her heart had leapt into her throat. Her first instinct was to run. The world was a dangerous place. But then she saw the gash on his head, the unnatural paleness of his skin. He was not a threat. He was a victim. Her compassion, a quality her father had always said was her greatest strength and greatest weakness, took over. She knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked softly. Alistair's eyes fluttered open. He saw a face, not a face of fear or disgust, but of gentle pity. He tried to speak, but his throat was a desert. "Water," he managed to croak. Without hesitation, Elara unscrewed the cap from her own metal canteen. It was all the water she had for her long walk back home. She gently lifted his head and brought the canteen to his lips. The cool water was the most exquisite thing Alistair had ever tasted. It was life itself. He drank greedily, the simple act of swallowing a monumental effort. When he finished, he looked at her, his mind still a complete void, but his heart filled with a single, overwhelming emotion, gratitude. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know who he was. All he knew was that this girl, this stranger, had shown him kindness when the world had shown him only fear and rejection. Elara knew she couldn't leave him here. The storm was gathering again, and he was in no condition to survive a night in the open. "Can you stand?" she asked. "My home is not far. You can rest there." With strength that belied her slender frame, she helped him to his feet. Leaning heavily on her, Alistair took his first steps into a new life. The walk to her cottage was a blur of pain and confusion for him, and a grueling effort for her. They finally arrived at a small whitewashed stone cottage, smoke curling gently from its chimney. Inside, the home was humble but immaculately clean. An old man with sad, defeated eyes sat in a chair by the fire. This was Thomas, her father. He looked at the stranger with suspicion, but a word from Elara was enough to quell his fears. Over the next few days, Elara nursed a stranger, whom she called John, back to health. She cleaned and dressed as wound. She fed him simple, nourishing broths. She gave him her father's old, clean clothes to wear. John slowly regained his physical strength, but his mind remained a locked room. He could not remember anything of his past. He began to help with chores, his soft, uncalloused hands clumsy at first. He chopped wood, tended their small vegetable garden, and repaired a broken fence. The physical labor was humbling. For the first time, He understood the effort that went into creating something with one's own hands. He listened as Elara spoke of her life, of her love for her father, of their simple struggles. He saw a world completely removed from the cold calculus of profit and loss. He saw a world built on loyalty, love, and resilience. And as he watched this young woman care for her broken father and a nameless stranger with unwavering kindness, something inside Alistair Finch began to thaw. Meanwhile, in the city, the world of high finance was in an uproar. The Titan, Alistair Finch, had vanished. Samuel was coordinating a frantic, nationwide search. The media was in a frenzy, speculating about kidnapping, foul play, or voluntary disappearance. The wreckage of the Maybach was eventually found in a ravine, not far from where Alistair had woken up. The search area narrowed. Helicopters began to circle the skies above the quiet countryside. One afternoon, as John was outside, mending a gate, he heard the thumping sound of a helicopter overhead. He looked up, a strange feeling of unease stirring within him. A few minutes later, a police car, followed by a black SUV, came roaring down the little country lane and screeched to a halt in front of the cottage. Samuel burst out of the SUV, his face a mask of relief and disbelief. "Bay Thorne." "Oh, thank God. We found you." Alistair or John stared at him blankly. "Thorne," he repeated, the name meaning nothing to him. "Who are you? How do you know me?" Samuel stopped, stunned by the vacant look in his boss's eyes. At that moment, Elara rushed out of the cottage, her face pale with fear. Thomas followed slowly behind her. It was then that Thomas's eyes fell on the man from the SUV. He recognized him. He had seen him once, years ago, standing behind Alistair Finch at a press conference. His blood ran cold. He looked at the man his daughter had been caring for, truly looked at him for the first time without the fog of amnesia clouding his features. The strong jawline, the piercing eyes. They were older, haunted, but unmistakable. "You," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Alistair. "It's you." Elara looked from her father to the stranger she had saved. "Baba? What is it? Who is he?" Thomas's voice cracked as he delivered the final, devastating truth. "That man, Elara, the man you brought into our home. He is Alistair Finch, the man who destroyed the mill, the man who destroyed me."